a lot of leaders are actually not good, as you know, you've seen this, of not accepting feedback all that well, and they don't like disagreement, right? That's a common problem.
Welcome back to the Retire As You Desire podcast. And I have a very, very dear friend of mine, Greg Miarecki, here joining us today. Greg has been an incredible leader. He's been a huge friend and really a big mentor to me throughout my personal career, my yacht club career for that matter. And he's just been such an incredible friend, not only on the sailboat, on the water, but in personal life. So Greg, thank you so much for being here today.
Bill, it's my honor. Thanks for the introduction. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, that's your first podcast.
I know, pretty exciting, right?
Yep. First time for everything.
Yeah. Our maiden voyage, our maiden podcast voyage.
There we go. We got to pop open the champagne. There we go.
Right. Well, maybe you wait and see after it's over, whether it's champagne or beer.
There we go. Yes. So, I remember meeting you for the first time. I was a young kid. I was at the Chicago Yacht Club. It was really when I joined. And
Sure.
I realized at an early age that there were some really influential people at the club. And you were definitely one of them.
I wish. Okay. All right. But I appreciate that.
Well, at the time, you really showed leadership towards us younger members because you really gave us a voice to go out and say, you know what, we want to do events, or we want to do this, or we want to do that. And I really think leadership is just in your DNA, it's in your blood, and it's a big part of your life. So when did you really start to see that, you know what, I like to take the reins, I like to become a leader? Did you get that from your parents? Was that from sailing? Where did you learn that skill from, Greg?
So a couple things about leadership. First of all, I probably sort of in the back of my mind when I was a kid, I generally speaking kind of didn't mind being in a leader role. But I actually don't necessarily agree that leadership is in your DNA. I think it can be learned, and I think it can be cultivated. And so there's lots of different types of leadership. So really what was animating, I think, our experience together when I first met you, and I do remember it very well, you were part of a group of young members. You're still pretty young, right? By Chicago Yacht Club standards. But you all were very interested in new ideas and making things happen. And in a way, you were all trying to lead. I guess the only thing I did was kind of put a microphone in front of you all, but you were ultimately the ones that were leading. So I think you can learn leadership. The animating principle I think that we all started working together on is I was very interested in bringing that particular organization into the next generation and having folks like you lead it. And so I took a particular interest in it, but I think you all were the ones that took the reins, is my 2 cents. So I do think there's some inherent leadership skills people have, but most of it I think can be learned. And I think that's a common misconception.
Yeah, and that's absolutely fair. Super fair. And when you were, learning how to sail, when your mom was like telling your dad, okay, we're going to get a boat, we're going to do this, we're going to get this boat, right? That was
sure. She did. She was the one that told him we were getting a boat.
Exactly. Yeah. Upper management, right? Our wives are upper management, as our dear friend Mr. Moore says.
Right.
Sailing's played such an important part of your life, Greg. And when you were a kid, when did you fall in love with sailing, and why did you fall in love with sailing?
I had no choice.
You didn't have a choice?
Right. I mean, I had no choice. So the way it worked, right, is I was a little kid, and my parents ended up buying a little 8-foot styrofoam boat in the 1970, and they ended up, sort of buying slightly bigger boats over time. And they liked going and hanging out on their boat on the weekend. It was a little boat. It wasn't anything fancy. And it was in a small yacht club on the south side of Chicago, a Jackson Park Yacht Club. It was not what people think of as a typical yacht club. It was just a small building where folks got together and went sailing, and my parents liked doing it. And I went along for the ride. They didn't ask, do you want to go? They just brought me along. And so I was basically I was along for the ride, really. Really, it was until I was 8 years old, I think, that we started racing. I found racing to be a lot more interesting than sort of puttering around. I was always frankly bored as a little kid puttering around on a boat. I don't know. I like a little, as you know, I like a little more action. So when we started racing, I got a little more into it.
That's fun. 8 years old. That's incredible. I wish I would have known about sailing and racing when I was that young. Gosh,
Yeah.
that would have been
Well,
incredible.
and it's something I actually wish I had gotten more involved with too. When I was a kid, and there are all these great junior programs now. Certainly a lot of yacht clubs around Chicago have great junior programs. We didn't have that back in the early 1980s. And so I just kind of had to learn, from different people. But yeah, it's a great sport. I mean, you can actually put kids on a little 5-year-old kid on a boat and have them learn things like independence and resilience and self-reliance and all those good sorts of things. And they're the only ones in the boat, and they get good at it pretty fast.
Independence, resilience. That sounds like something that is difficult for parents to really have a concept for a 5-year-old. And like, we're going to enroll James and
Right.
Noah in sailing school, and they're 5. So, I mean, we're telling all of our friends to do that who are not members. That's a big transformation to give kids that freedom to go out and figure things out. I know parents, even us included, who are, okay, don't do this, don't do that. It's difficult to let them go. And as a leader, because I know you are, how easy is it, or how difficult is it for you to let other people go and let them figure things out? And whether that was your law practice before or running the foundation, right? I mean, we can go really deep into this right now.
Sure. Well, look, I think this is one of the most difficult aspects of leadership. A lot of people are high performers and they want to do everything themselves. But the truth of it is, if you want to do something really big, you have to rely on other people. And so a boat is a great example, right? Our boat is, as you know, right, 35 feet. I literally can't do everything myself on the boat. I have to have other people do things if you're going to do well. And I actually think that's one of the ways that you can actually do pretty well in a lot of these races. It's not so much important that you're really good, but you want to have a bunch of reasonably good people around you that work as a team. So it's very difficult to not micromanage, and I'm guilty of it sometimes. But you have to make a conscious effort really to try to delegate and let other people get involved. But it's hard, and a lot of people aren't very good at it, and it's frustrating. And you have to be willing actually to fail. Have somebody else try something and fail. Ultimately, if you want to long term be successful in terms of leadership and getting other people up to speed.
And did you see in your law practice that other partners or other people would let people fail, or they would let their juniors or the associates to go out and do the right thing or the wrong thing and learn from that? What was your experience, Greg?
Right. So yeah, I was a partner in a law firm for many years. And so the problem is that lawyers, it turns out most lawyers aren't actually that good at being leaders, because law school doesn't actually teach you how to be a leader. Most of law school is an individual sport, right? Most everything in law school is done by yourself, right? You take tests by yourself, you might study in groups, but you're mostly doing everything yourself. And so when you put somebody in a team environment, lawyers do have a tendency to micromanage, and they also aren't very good at delegating responsibility to younger people and giving them and letting them fail. I found when I was in practice, I had a bunch of young lawyers working with me, and I got the idea of, if I could get these first and second year associates to do 5th and 6th year work, we could actually do big cases more cheaply, because I had kids at the time, right? I was a kid myself, but we referred to it as managing the kids. Now, the first and second year associates, the kids, as we called them back 20 years ago, are all now senior, capital partners in many of the big law firms in around the country. So I don't think most lawyers are very good at it, but I guess I made a very intentional effort to try to get the younger lawyers up to speed, and it mostly worked. They're all very successful. Not all at my prior firm, but many firms around the country.
What was it like for you working on those big cases? I know you had some more high profile cases, and you are a young partner too, Greg. You're very, very young at your law firm. So it's a very predominant, still is, law firm here in
Yeah.
Chicago. So how did you rise to leadership so quickly at such a young age? Because that's pretty remarkable.
So, well, I appreciate that. I don't, that's a good question. I have to think about this. So the first thing is, I think I had a lot of really excellent mentors, right? So I was involved in a lot of big cases, in part because a lot of my mentors at my law firm brought me on the case, right? So that's where I learned a lot of these things. And so I think the way that they picked me, it wasn't that I was the best lawyer in the room. I did try to work harder than most people, right? I think that's where a work ethic is sometimes overrated, maybe, but I think work ethic counts for a lot. So I think most people realize that I would be there till the job was done, and I would try to put everything I had into it. I think those are table stakes, but they do help propel you along the way. And so once you get in there, then it's the next step, I think, is trying to add value, looking for ways to add value that even though people aren't really talking to you about, hey, do this, do that, trying to figure out ways to add value is, I think, the next piece. And then after that, once you become more senior, being able to get other people up to speed and teaching them how to practice law. I think all of those things together kind of create the McKinsey people would call it a virtuous circle, right? And that's kind of how I got to, some of these big cases. But these big cases are not, they're not necessarily always fun, right? They're a lot of, it's a grind. A lot of being in a big law firm can be a grind. And I know a lot of your listeners are big law firm partners, and they'll probably relate to that. So, I'm not sure that everybody should be a big law firm partner, but I think that those are all ingredients that help people propel people along to a certain point.
And when you said you're going to be there, you're going to spend the time, you're going to get the work done, how have you and Chris, your wife, been able to balance your relationship? Because she has a very demanding role too. She has over the years too. And then you have sailing, and then you have that throughout the weekends in Chicago, and we're limited. How have you and Chris been able to balance that? Because I think a lot of couples have trouble with that, especially in the boating community sometimes. So
yeah, full disclosure, right? We don't have kids. So I think that probably is a factor. That's certainly a factor in the whole thing. And I think, Chris and I keep an open line of communication, and we know enough about each other's jobs that, we can sort of put ourselves in the other person's shoes and understand what they're going through to a point. And I think that helps too, frankly.
Yeah. Especially when you become the CEO and you're running things. Yeah, that's hard. Or you're a partner. That's definitely, you need to keep those lines of communication open. That's a form of leadership too. Now,
well, that's true. I think that absolutely is true. The concept of being a strong communicator. If you look at a lot of good leaders over time, you'll see that communication is, generally speaking, something that they have in common. Being a strong communicator. Martin Luther King's a great example, right? Martin Luther King Jr. is, most people think of Dr. King as an orator, great orator. They don't necessarily think of him in leadership, right? But the truth is, he was an extraordinary leader. But one of the reasons he was an extraordinary leader is because he was good at communication. And it isn't just, the I have a dream speech, right? It's the way he communicated with people on an everyday basis. One of the remarkable things about Dr. King, in fact, is the fact that he listened quite carefully to people around him, and he was willing to change the way he saw things based on input. Now, that's a different communication skill, but I think it was actually probably more relevant than the fact that he could actually stir up a crowd.
That's
as
brilliant.
an example.
Yeah, that's so brilliant. Absolutely brilliant, Greg. And we had a conversation the other day. This was fun. You had asked me a question, like, how do you get all this stuff done with a lot of things going on?
Yeah, I know.
You asked me that
did
question. And I told you, I try and do the least amount of things possible that I'm good at. Really, just 2 to 3 things, focus on them, and have other people do that.
Right.
because they probably love doing the things that you hate. Why is that so important to understand the things that you love doing, that things that you're really good at, and have everyone else do all of the other crappy stuff per se? Like, why can't people let that go?
Why can't people do that?
Right. And why is it so important?
Well, I think it's important. Well, first of all, I think that you've demonstrated this, I think, better than anybody. I think one of the reasons you want to stick to what you're good at is because you like it more. And if you don't like your job, you're not going to be as good at it. I think that's just a kind of a basic principle. So I think limiting yourself to things that you're good at, if you can possibly do it, will make you sort of better at it, and the amount of output that you'll be able to provide is going to be good. Why do you need to have other people involved? I mean, the point there, we touched on it earlier, is you can't do anything really big by yourself. And so I think trying to identify people that complement you in terms of being able to shore up your weaknesses. I mean, we all have weaknesses, right? I mean, we all do. So if you can figure out a way to, have other people shore those weaknesses up, it makes you, to use a campaign term from an election past, is stronger together, right? I think that those are a couple of reasons why that concept you've identified is important.
Absolutely. And now, I think you are the youngest Commodore ever at the Chicago Yacht Club, correct? Is that
That's what the
history,
the old people say. I don't know if that's, I mean, it's hard. I mean, if you look at the pictures on the wall, I theoretically look younger than anybody else on the wall. But I don't, that's my understanding, I guess.
Yeah. So for the people who are listening, when you become the Commodore of a yacht club, it's not a paid position, it's volunteering. The yacht club is a charitable organization, in some senses from a tax purpose standpoint, but sometimes it's not super glamorous. You're really in the weeds, you're in the thick of it. You have everyone complaining to you from time to time. Even when you're on the board, you have people coming up to your table and
To
saying,
you
hey,
anyway, right?
exactly. Those were the good old days. But I don't like this, I don't like that. And it's like, I just want to enjoy my meal. So how did you handle that throughout the years?
Well,
And you're still, running the Chicago Yacht Club Foundation, which is a super, super important group here in Chicago who help underprivileged kids learn about the nautical arts and STEM and sailing and boating. So why don't you go into that, Greg?
Sure. So actually, I think one of the misconceptions is at least this is true for me, I actually had very few people complain to me. One of the common conceptions, and I've heard this a lot, is that everybody assumes that whoever's in charge will get complaints all the time. So actually that happened relatively rarely. The second point is this: if you do one of these jobs, and to your listeners are probably involved in leadership positions all over, if you're doing the position because you want the title or you want to put it on your resume, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons people do these sorts of volunteer jobs, right? I mean, this is just an example that we're happy to use that Bill and I both know about. But if you're just doing it for a title, then when people do complain to you, you're going to be, it's going to be aggravating to you. But if you're doing it because you're actually trying to make the organization better, then when somebody's complaining to you, it actually is a gift, right? Feedback is actually a gift if in fact you're doing a job for the right reason. If you're doing it because you want somebody to pat you on the back and tell you what a great job you're doing, then of course the feedback is going to be irritating. But I actually, when somebody raised an issue with me, I was actually generally interested in trying to solve the problem because the odds are quite good that I agreed with them. And then once in a while, people would complain about something that I didn't agree with, and then I would tell them I disagreed with them.
Absolutely.
And that's okay. I don't mind disagreeing. I mean, I think it's healthy to have some disagreement. That's another thing, by the way, about being a leader. A lot of leaders are actually not good, as you know, you've seen this, of not accepting feedback all that well, and they don't like disagreement, right? That's a common problem. I don't mind disagreement. I don't want to be yelling at each other, that's not fun. But if somebody disagrees with me, I'm actually kind of curious as to why. So I think it's very healthy to have different perspectives,
especially in a big organization, or if you want to do something big. That's super, super important.
By the way, this is actually one of the reasons that diversity, equity, and inclusion is actually important from a leadership perspective. I mean, those words are kind of used. I mean, they're sort of being overused lately. But one of the reasons you actually do need a diverse and inclusive group of leaders, right, is because, you know, we all have our own perspectives. Nobody, I mean, you and I see the world differently, but we might see, you know, other people see it differently. Having a diverse group of people around to provide different perspectives will make sure that you analyze an issue from a variety of different perspectives and get to the right answer. And so I actually think the feedback and willingness to hear an alternative viewpoint is healthy and improves the odds you get the answer right.